In 1898, the Swedish Arctic expedition, lost and battling the frozen wastes, reported finding not just a forest, but something else entirely beneath the ice, something the official reports scrubbed from history, leaving behind only tantalizing whispers and a single suppressed photograph. This was the ill-fated endeavor of Salomon August Andrée, a flamboyant engineer and balloonist whose grand vision was to float a hydrogen balloon, the Örnen, or eagle, directly over the geographic North Pole. A bold, some might say reckless, undertaking for the turn of the 20th century, where the Arctic remained one of Earth's greatest unexplored frontiers. Andrée, along with his companions Niels Strindberg, a photographer, and Knut Frankel, an engineer, launched their balloon from Spitsbergen on July 11, 1897. Their aspiration was nothing short of heroic: to achieve what no explorer had before, relying on an untested technology in the most hostile environment imaginable. However, the voyage quickly devolved into a catastrophic struggle against the elements. The Örnen, battered by unexpected headwinds and shedding hydrogen at an alarming rate, was forced to land on the ice pack just 2 days after launch, approximately 300 miles north of Spitsbergen. Their grand aerial adventure had transformed into a grueling, desperate trek across a chaotic landscape of shifting ice, pressure ridges, and open leads of freezing water. For months, these 3 men, isolated from the world with no means of communication, battled against overwhelming odds. Their food supplies, initially plentiful, dwindled with each passing week. The Arctic summer, brief and unforgiving, gave way to the encroaching darkness of the polar winter. The extreme peril of their situation cannot be overstated. They were adrift on a colossal frozen ocean, exposed to temperatures that could kill within minutes, facing starvation, frostbite, and the constant threat of polar bears. Navigation was a nightmare, with compasses rendered unreliable by the proximity to the magnetic pole, and the perpetually overcast skies, often obscuring the sun, their primary celestial guide. Their diaries, later recovered, paint a grim picture of their daily struggle. Hauling heavy sledges laden with equipment and rapidly decreasing provisions across an incessantly shifting ice flow. Each step was an act of profound, existential perseverance. It was during this desperate, unimaginable ordeal, somewhere amidst the vast, featureless expanse of the Arctic desert, that the expedition made its profoundly unsettling discovery, a discovery that went far beyond their navigational failures and their eventual tragic demise. It was not merely the frozen remnants of an ancient forest, as some early, vague reports suggested, but something altogether different, a revelation so profound, so utterly jarring to the prevailing scientific understanding, that its suppression was almost a foregone conclusion. The very notion that official circles actively scrubbed such a finding from history implies an inherent threat it posed to established paradigms and narratives. The tantalizing whispers that persisted alongside that solitary, suppressed photograph hinted at an encounter not with natural history, but with something far more enigmatic and potentially disturbing. 33 years later, in the summer of 1930, the last camp of the ill-fated expedition was finally discovered, preserved remarkably by the relentless Arctic cold. It was a somber scene, one that evoked both relief and a profound sense of melancholy among the search parties. Yet amidst the scattered remnants of their final bivouac lay a treasure trove of historical and scientific potential. Recovered from the ice were the explorers' meticulously kept diaries, their logbooks, some water-damaged, others miraculously intact, and crucially, several rolls of photographic film. Many of these rolls were found to be brittle and scarred by exposure, their emulsions having endured decades of sub-zero temperatures. The arduous process of developing these fragile negatives was a delicate dance between scientific precision and historical preservation, undertaken by expert conservators in Stockholm. It was only after this painstaking development process that the true significance of the expedition's final days began to emerge. The initial, tantalizing clues to something far more profound than mere petrified wood were imprinted not in the explorers' written accounts, but in these nascent images. The official reports, released months later, spoke sparingly of geological samples and unusual mineral formations. They maintained a cautious, almost dismissive tone regarding any anomalous findings. Yet, within these very reports, inconsistencies began to surface. Discussions of the wood samples invariably led to vague scientific justifications for their unusual density and atypical cellular structures, observations that, even at the time, seemed to strain credulity for experts familiar with Arctic flora and geology. One particular entry in a preliminary scientific assessment, now largely forgotten, mentioned the strikingly homogeneous composition of the retrieved wood, noting its absence of characteristic growth rings and a crystallized internal matrix, unlike any known terrestrial timber. These were the first whispers of a narrative far removed from the published account of a pioneering, albeit tragic, Arctic exploration. They hinted at structural properties that defied conventional biological explanations, suggesting a substance not formed organically, but engineered. The scientific establishment, perhaps understandably, wrestled with these anomalies, attempting to fit them into existing frameworks. The struggle was palpable in the internal memos and correspondence of the time, revealing a quiet unease beneath the veneer of official scientific consensus. The term petrified itself, while seemingly innocuous, was a deliberate semantic choice, serving to categorize the unknown into the familiar, thereby sidestepping a deeper, more unsettling inquiry into what these samples truly represented. This deliberate categorization, however, could not entirely obscure the more perplexing internal observations. What the expedition's fragmented records, particularly Andrée's meticulous but often elliptical journal entries, truly reveal goes significantly beyond the conventional understanding of prehistoric, fossilized wood. The recovered photographic plates, meticulously analyzed decades later, offered glimpses into the structure of these samples. One particular series, taken in low light within the temporary research station, depicted sections of the unearthed forest with an eerie phosphorescence, a soft, internal glow that pulsed faintly in the dark. Sven Andrée, in a personal note appended to his scientific log, described this as a persistent, cool light, utterly unlike any bioluminescence I have witnessed, nor the common phosphorescence of minerals activated by external light sources. He meticulously detailed attempts to isolate and measure this internal radiation, noting its stability and unchanging hue across varied atmospheric pressures and temperatures. This crystalline internal matrix, mentioned in early discarded reports, was not merely a petrified cellular structure where organic material had been replaced by minerals. Instead, samples exhibited a geometric regularity at the microscopic level that baffled the expedition's botanist, Knut Frankel. His field sketches, rediscovered among his personal effects, show intricate, interwoven patterns that resembled neither plant cells nor geological formations. Frankel's annotations, written in a cramped, almost panicked hand, express profound doubt. It possesses the appearance of wood, the grain, the bark-like exterior, the fibrous consistency. Yet, at its heart, it is something else entirely. No cellular structure aligns with terrestrial flora. Its rigidity, even when subjected to extreme pressure, far exceeds that of any known timber, petrified or otherwise. It splinters not along grain lines, but shears with the precision of fractured glass, revealing facets that glitter even in dim light. The phrase, "It wasn't wood," became a recurring whisper among the surviving members of the support team and junior scientists who, on their return, were privy to the initial, unedited findings. It was a phrase born from direct observation of the unearthed forest itself. Descriptions circulated of trees appearing to grow uniformly, their branches and trunks seemingly identical in size and shape, forming an almost architectural grid beneath the ice. The texture was consistently reported as smooth to the touch, often cold, almost metallic, yet possessing a faint, fibrous superficial layer that mimicked organic wood. Unlike natural petrification, which often preserves the intricate details of wood grain and cellular structure by mineral replacement, these samples showed an unnervingly homogeneous composition, devoid of characteristic growth rings or internal vascular systems. Andrée himself, in a more candid passage of his journal, wrestled with the implications. He noted that while outward appearances suggested wood, the substance defied chemical analysis consistent with lignin or cellulose-based materials. Instead, preliminary field tests pointed towards an inorganic crystalline structure, remarkably lightweight, yet possessing a tensile strength that far surpassed steel. He wrote, "What we believe to be a forest is a construct. Its form is organic, an undeniable mimicry of life, yet its essence is mineral, or perhaps something wholly alien to our geological and biological comprehension. The faint internal phosphorescence is not a reflection, but an intrinsic property, suggesting an embedded energy source sustained without apparent decay for centuries beneath this frozen shroud." This was not just petrified wood. It was an enigma that seemed to challenge the very definitions of life and matter. The photographic plates, meticulously catalogued by André's team, offer tantalizing glimpses into the true nature of this discovery. Upon first glance, they depict what appear to be ancient, gnarled tree trunks, twisted into unnatural configurations within the ice. Yet, a more rigorous, modern scientific re-examination, using digital enhancement and compositional analysis techniques unavailable to Andrée, reveals discrepancies that are profoundly unsettling. The structures, while mimicking organic wood in their macro forms, exhibit patterns and compositions demonstrably inconsistent with any known terrestrial timber. There is an absence of characteristic cellular structure, no discernible xylem or phloem. Instead, what is discernible through careful digital filtering are crystalline lattices and fracture patterns that align more closely with inorganic mineral formations, yet possess a fluidity and interconnectedness typically associated with biological growth. Even more intriguing, or perhaps disturbing, are the alleged unofficial analyses performed decades later on a small, unacknowledged sample said to have originated from the Andrée expedition's findings. These analyses, conducted by independent research groups who sought to confirm or refute the expedition's suppressed records, consistently reported anomalous isotopic compositions. Specifically, ratios of specific carbon and oxygen isotopes were found to deviate significantly from accepted terrestrial norms, suggesting a non-terrestrial origin. Furthermore, trace elements were identified in concentrations and configurations not naturally occurring on Earth. While the provenance and chain of custody for such samples remain, by their very nature, obscured and unofficial, the consistency of these findings across multiple, independent examinations raises profound implications. They point towards a material that, while possessing the outward appearance of ancient wood, fundamentally diverges from it at the atomic level, hinting at an origin beyond our planet or from a geological process unknown to terrestrial science. Yet, officially, the verdict was swift and definitive. The anomalies, the strange strength, the faint luminescence, all were dismissed. The initial findings were officially classified as nothing more than petrified timber, a convenient and scientifically sound explanation designed to quell further inquiry and curiosity. This classification, perhaps intentionally, deflected attention from the deeper, more perplexing questions surrounding extraordinary properties and compositions, effectively closing the door to independent investigation and the potentially revolutionary implications of Andrée's discovery. The scientific establishment, perhaps overwhelmed by the implications of a non-terrestrial organic mimicry, chose the most mundane explanation, an act that effectively buried the true nature of what lay beneath the Arctic ice for generations. The official narrative, however, did not emerge organically. It was meticulously constructed. Examination of declassified documents from the era reveals a concerted effort within certain governmental and scientific circles to manage the information flow. The initial reports, replete with the unsettling observations of abnormal density and resistance to degradation, were progressively redacted, softened, and eventually supplanted by simplified versions. The systematic suppression, or more accurately, the reinterpretation of the expedition's fuller findings, involved a surprisingly small but influential cadre of individuals. Among these were high-ranking members of the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, whose initial intellectual curiosity seemingly gave way to a pragmatic determination to avoid what they termed unnecessary public alarm. There are indications that financial patrons of the expedition, who had significant stakes in maintaining a stable public image for Arctic exploration as a purely scientific endeavor, applied considerable pressure. It wasn't the discovery itself, but its profoundly anomalous nature that became inconvenient. An unknown, non-terrestrial organic material did not fit neatly into existing geological or botanical frameworks, threatening to destabilize established paradigms. Consider, for instance, the curious case of Dr. Eric Johnson, one of the lead geologists on the original assessment team. His early field notes, which surface periodically in obscure archival sales, are filled with detailed micrographs and chemical analyses that directly contradict the petrified timber conclusion. Johnson's notes describe crystalline structures unparalleled in known organic matter, and elemental ratios inconsistent with any terrestrial carbon-based life form. Yet, within months of the initial public pronouncement, Johnson was abruptly reassigned to a remote meteorological station in Lapland, far from any further Arctic research. His subsequent research output was minimal, and his earlier, more radical findings were never published under his name. This pattern is not without historical precedent. One need only recall the initial governmental responses to certain archaeological discoveries in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, where artifacts challenging prevailing historical timelines were often downplayed, miscategorized, or even catalogued in ways that deliberately obscured their origins or true significance. The Piltdown Man hoax, while ultimately exposed, illustrates a willingness to manipulate facts to fit a popular narrative, albeit in a different context. In the case of the Swedish expedition, the motive appears to have been less about fraud and more about control of public perception and the scientific discourse. The official reports downplayed the more unusual descriptions of the non-wood aspect. Phrases such as remarkably resilient or unusually dense were replaced with generic descriptors. Any mention of the faint, intrinsic luminescence observed by some members of the expedition was entirely excised. The reclassification was subtle but effective. What was initially an enigma, demanding extensive interdisciplinary study, became a mere curiosity. The material was filed away, figuratively and literally, in university basements, its extraordinary characteristics now buried under layers of mundane, bureaucratic classifications. The rapid disappearance of certain research documents, initial chemical analyses, detailed spectroscopic data, and comprehensive photographic records of the sample's structural oddities, further underscores this deliberate campaign. These documents, once accessible within the Swedish National Archives, vanished from public record in the mid-20th century, only to resurface in fragmented form through unofficial channels decades later, corroborating the initial, more unsettling accounts. The abrupt reassignment of key geologists like Johnson and other specialists who echoed his concerns ensured that the official narrative remained unchallenged from within. The official reassessment effectively sealed the fate of a discovery that should have rewritten chapters of earth sciences. The petrified wood explanation, dutifully propagated, thus became the accepted truth, a convenient blanket under which inconvenient truths could be obscured. Yet the inconsistencies persisted, whispered in academic corners and recorded in the margins of personal diaries. How could wood, petrified or otherwise, demonstrate such structural homogeneity over vast, unknown expanses, far exceeding the typical geological formations for fossilized trees. What geological process could imbue such organic material with the unusual density and unparalleled resistance to degradation, particularly under Arctic conditions, characteristics that defied known petrification mechanisms? The expedition's private logs, later heavily redacted before their public release, contained fleeting references to an unnatural grain and an intrinsic warmth perceptible to the touch even in sub-zero temperatures, attributes entirely irreconcilable with any form of wood. Witnesses, albeit informally, recalled scientists debating the implications of trace elements found within the samples, elements not typically associated with terrestrial flora, suggesting an origin far more complex than simple biological fossilization. These details, meticulously scrubbed from official records, only resurface through the painstaking efforts of independent researchers decades after the fact, painting a picture far more intricate and unsettling than the official narrative allowed. The question then remains, what truly lay beneath the Arctic ice, and what compelled such a concerted effort to mischaracterize it? The Swedish expedition, ostensibly a quest for scientific knowledge, stumbled upon something that challenged established paradigms to such an extent that its true nature had to be veiled. The petrified wood explanation, therefore, was not merely an inadequate description, but a deliberate obfuscation, a strategically crafted narrative designed to contain a potentially world-altering discovery. It provided a digestible, non-threatening answer to a profoundly disquieting question, effectively neutralizing the intellectual curiosity that an honest report would have undoubtedly ignited. The legacy of the Andrée expedition, therefore, is not solely one of tragic loss and human endurance, but also one of enforced silence. It stands as a stark reminder of how comfortably certain institutions can maintain control over historical truths, particularly when those truths threaten to unravel deeply held scientific or societal assumptions. The petrified wood account, by now a century-old historical footnote, serves as a potent illustration of how easily a radical discovery can be downgraded, reclassified, and ultimately erased from public consciousness, becoming a mere curiosity rather than a profound challenge to our understanding. The machinery that keeps these histories hidden is subtle, yet incredibly powerful, operating not through overt suppression, but through the slow, steady erosion of critical details and the convenient rewriting of inconvenient facts. We are left, then, not with clarity, but with a profound, persistent mystery, echoing across the icy expanse of the Arctic and through the corridors of academic history. If you don't want to miss our next investigation into the hidden histories that don't make it into textbooks, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications.